Hello, I'm Scott Thompson, and welcome to After 10. President Park Geun-hye is nearing the end of a week-long trip that's taken her to the Netherlands and Germany. From the Nuclear Security Summit to summit talks with her American, Chinese, and Japanese counterparts, the president's schedule has been jam-packed. On today's After 10, an in-depth look at her trip.
As a keynote speaker at the Nuclear Security Summit, President Park showed a strong will to denuclearize the Korean peninsula.
저는 북핵 문제를 해결하는 것이 핵무기 없는 세상을 만드는 데 꼭 필요하고, 그래서 핵무기 없는 세상의 비전은 한반도에서 시작되어야 한다는 신념을 가지고 있습니다.
In overseas trips last year, the president focused on so-called sales diplomacy. During this visit, the focus is on nuclear safety and unification. At the beginning of this year, President Park made it clear that proper diplomatic strategies are needed to achieve unification.
통일은 우리만의 노력으로 되는 것이 아니라 통일 공감대 확산을 위한 국제 협력을 강화할 것입니다.
And the president has started to give her vision shape during her state visits to the Netherlands and Germany. What kind of impact will the president's diplomatic policy toward unification have on the international community? We take an overall assessment of the president's week-long trip overseas.
Professor Park, thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's open with President Park Geun-hye's opening speech at the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague this week. In that speech, she proposed a 4-point plan for a nuclear-free world. What has the response been to her speech?
Well, as you mentioned, President Park Geun-hye, she mentioned a very interesting 4 suggestion. Out of those 4 points, I think it is important to pay attention to 2 points out of those 4 plans. The first one is, so far, within the nuclear issue, there are a lot of specific different areas, such as nuclear weapons, non-proliferation issue, and nuclear energy program, and etc. So normally we have 4 different dimensions and discussion channels to handle those comprehensive nuclear issue. But one of the critical suggestions made by President Park Geun-hye at last Hague conference, it was to integrate those different discussion channels and framework to achieve a better kind of the nuclear-free society. So, which is quite meaningful to my understanding. And the second one is that still we have very impressive and quite successfully working mechanism, but which is quite broadly working without having specific regional base and focus. So in particular, the second point made by President Park Geun-hye was to establish regional-based nuclear, the handling organization or discussion channel. Eventually, those different regional-based organizations, heading to one larger, comprehensive global mechanism. So that we have to, pay extra attention, and which is very attractive, actually.
President Xi expressed support for a peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, also expressed support for President Park's plan to set up a preparatory committee on reunification.
Yes.
What message does President Xi's support send?
Regarding the summit between President Park Geun-hye and President Xi Jinping, well, still we have very interesting debate within our society, which is whether so-called the fifth generation of the the leadership, Chinese leadership under the Xi Jinping, whether they are changing their policy towards North Korea or not. The first group say that yes, they have some substantial change in terms of their, the approaches to North Korea. Second group still, no, they looks like slightly changing, but internally and eventually they have same national interest and very close friendship, etc. But frankly speaking, I have no idea what is the real mind within the Xi Jinping's mind. I mean, the idea. But at the same time, it's true. After Xi Jinping became the president, which was last year, they gradually showing meaningful difference in terms of Sino-North Korean relations. In particular, the stronger support to South Korea's North Korean policy and stronger support, to achieve denuclearized North Korean regime. So in that sense, by having the second summit, Xi Jinping obviously specifically mentioned supporting denuclearized Korean Peninsula and also supporting South Korea, the President Park Geun-hye's new plan, having the new committee and very quite aggressive North Korea unification policy, etc.
The SixParty Talks has been a real lot of attention paid to that in recent months. China's really pushing to get them resumed. South Korea and the U.S. say they want some sincerity out of the North first. They want to see concrete steps made by the regime there that they are trying to disarm their nuclear program. All of this talk about the SixParty Talks, it's been 6 years now since the last round. Is it futile?
2008, yes.
Yeah. Is it reasonable to think that they actually could resume again, being that we are 6 years removed from the last round?
Actually, literally speaking, all the member states of the SixParty Talk, they have been welcoming to resume the SixParty Talks. But one of the critical conditions is that within the same group, South Korea and the United States, another group within, typically including North Korea and China, they have very critically different views in terms of what is the condition to reopen, to resume the SixParty Talk again after 2008 meeting. Obviously, official position of South Korean government and U.S. is without a meaningful step or some kind of actions done by North Korea, the SixParty Talk, having another meetings in the SixParty Talk is meaningless. But at the same time, China and North Korea, whenever they have a chance, they said that just immediate opening itself could reach some peaceful steps or some significant development to achieve better condition on the Korean Peninsula. It's very critical differences. But still, I don't think our government or American government, they are giving up the certain type of condition should be done by North Korean government. But I think we are more flexible and have wider voice, what kind of condition that we are asking to North Korea to resume the SixParty Talks. In that sense, the agreement between President Park Geun-hye and Xi Jinping and the agreement between, Korea, US, Japan was quite meaningful in the last meeting in Hague.
President Park Geun-hye finally met with Japanese Prime Minister Abe. It was the first summit between the two leaders since the two administrations were established more than a year ago. It was a trilateral summit between Korea, the United States, and Japan, where U.S. President Barack Obama stepped up to take a mediator role.
Trilateral cooperation has sent a strong signal to Pyongyang that its provocations and threats will be met with a unified response, and that a nuclear North Korea is unacceptable.
영내 평화와 안정에 가장 위협이 되고 있는 이 북핵 문제는 한미일 3국을 포함한 국제사회의 단합된 대응이 매우 중요하다고 생각합니다.
The leaders of Korea, the U.S., and Japan reconfirmed the need of mutual assistance to deal with the North's nuclear issue. Will the trilateral summit have any impact on a resumption of the SixParty Talks or in improving Korea-Japan relations?
We have a couple of questions sent in by our viewers. The first one, Japan has proposed bilateral talks with Korea several times, but President Park has refused to engage in talks with Japanese Prime Minister Abe. Can we now expect some positive changes in Korea-Japan relations after this trilateral summit?
according to my understanding, yes, as you mentioned, finally, after a certain period of the diplomatic tension between Korea and Japan, finally we had a meeting, summit together, obviously having the Obama together, President Obama together. But I don't think the last trilateral summit easily, had to another meaningful bilateral summit between Korea and Japan. The last trilateral meeting between Korea, Japan, and U.S. should be interpreted, South Korea's national interest, Japanese national interest, it has a lot of different factors and areas and point and target. So the bilateral relations between the Korea and Japan is not the only sector within the two countries, the comprehensive national interest. So something should be discussed bilaterally. Something should be discussed with having U.S. together, or something should be discussed or communicated within larger angle. So within that context, North Korean nuclear issue one of very attractive or a meaningful discussion agenda. But as mentioned in the media, they never discuss about historical issue or comfort woman issue and etc. So trilateral meeting, summit, President Obama and Prime Minister Abe and President Park Geun-hye, it is welcomed by everyone. But that does not necessarily lead to more consolidated bilateral cooperation between Japan and Korea,
Sure.
Korea and Japan.
Second question in from one of our viewers reads, the U.S. showed a will to take a mediator role to improve Korea-Japan relations. Why is that?
After end of the World War II and after the Korean War, which was the starting point to establish the current modern international relations of the Northeast Asian region. After that period, one of the critical policy of U.S. within the Northeast Asian region is kind of liberal cooperation between U.S., Korea, Japan under the American leadership, under the American initiative, which is very strong diplomatic asset to American government. Not only just Northeast Asian region, but also I assume out of 30 to 40 alliance partners of the American, Korea and Japan is one of the reliable bilateral partners. So the trilateral cooperation between U.S., Korea, Japan was critical condition to achieve better strategic position of U.S. in the region. And considering recently, including the rise of China and the possibility of the Japanese militarization, etc., everyone pointed out that the current diplomatic tension between Korea and Japan was a very uncomfortable situation to American government. In that sense, American role to mediate the diplomatic condition between Korea and Japan is very acceptable and understandable.
Getting back to that talk between President Park and Prime Minister Abe, going into the talks, before these talks actually happened, what do you think both leaders were trying to get out of the talks?
Right. It is another complicated issue. Not only national interest between the two or foreign policy or diplomatic concern, but also, as national leader, both President Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Abe should carefully consider the domestic political condition and domestic public opinion and etc. But at the same time, both in Korea and Japan, domestically they have some pressure as well. Having better relations between the two countries. So they have to, I think they should carefully consider their domestic political situation and what is the very complicated calculation, etc. And again, regarding North Korean issue, regarding current very complicated territorial issue between China and Japan and between China and Korea and between Korea and Japan, etc. There's something should be communicated and cooperated between Japan and Korea and Japan. So, again, as I mentioned, domestic conditions and current Northeast Asian situation, and also, if we include U.S. again, U.S.-Japan relation and Korea-U.S. relation is also heading to global agenda, not only within the Northeast Asian region. So considering all those factors, two leaders have some meaningful outcomes and yes, as well. Yeah.
President Park visualized her diplomatic strategy to achieve reunification during her state visit to Germany. During the Nuclear Security Summit, she focused on the North Korean nuclear issue in talks with the leaders of the US, China, and Japan. And the president emphasized her strong will for the unification on the Korean Peninsula during her state visit to Germany.
그 치열한 힘들이 모여 베를린 장벽을 무너뜨렸던 것처럼 우리 휴전선도 반드시 무너지는 날이 올 것이라고 확신합니다.
The international community has paid close attention to President Park's blueprint for reunification proposed during her visit to Germany, one of the representative models for unification.
Let's shift gears to the president's trip to Germany. She's there as part of something that they're calling unification diplomacy. She's there to learn lessons from Germany about its unification experience and perhaps bring some of those lessons back here to put into practice for Korea's reunification. What types of lessons can we expect the president to learn during her trip?
You know, the German unification almost longer than only 2 decades ago. So, and for the last 2 decades, we understand both the previous West German and previous East German, they have some problems after the unification, but they quite successfully handled those issues, such as social integration and, you know, German version of the, you know, discrimination, etc., etc. But finally, after 2 decades, Germany is one of the, you know, leading economies in the world, and according to the statistics, Germany is kind of fourth, you know, largest economy in the world. So since President Park Geun-hye has a special focus, in particular this year, on the unification is a bonanza or whatever, jackpot or breakthrough. So we have to carefully pay attention what they have done after integration between unification between US and East Germany. So what their previous steps to achieve the current, you know, meaningful achievement. And also, personally, we understand, you know, the German leader, the Merkel, and President Park Geun-hye, the two have very interesting, you know, close friendship as well. So they have some invisible lessons, or, you know, the kind of chips as well. And visiting to Dresden is also very meaningful, which is economically underdeveloped area, and also because of unification, Dresden is one of the most developed areas in European region as well. So such kind of topics and such kinds of the very meaningful experience done by Germany should be, you know, something delivered to Korean case as well.
Let's talk about Dresden a little bit. When most people think of German unification, the first city to come to mind is Berlin for obvious reasons.
Because of the fall of the wall.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But Dresden these days seems to be more of the focal point. Tell us a little bit more about why that is.
It is a very interesting issue, focusing, you know, either Berlin or Dresden. If we focus on Berlin, it is more closely related to specifically unification or Cold War because of the dramatic fall down of the wall. But you know, considering all the current situation, but if we try to focus not only to unification or the dismantling structure of the Cold War structure on the Korean Peninsula, but also think about previous historical issue. Dresden is a more attractive place by saying that, as covered in the media, Dresden during the World War II, you know, I understand about 250,000 citizens in Dresden killed by the war, but such kind of the, you know, war memory successfully transferred to economic development as well, and also after, you know, the solving the Cold War problem. President Park Geun-hye, whenever she has a chance, to focus on historical issue in Northeast Asian region as well, and also, you know, very strong driving regarding the unification policy. So Dresden has more multi-layered point and attraction points, such as dismantling Cold War structure, unification, and economic growth, creative economy, and historical issue as well. So in that sense, very interesting point.
And if she's talking about unification, you can be sure that North Korea will be paying close attention to what she says. How do you think they're going to respond to what she says in the speech?
Well, it's quite bad to say that recently North Korea had, it seems to us, North Korea is making another crisis by, the short-range missile test and etc. Well, after, the inauguration point, President Park Geun-hye, she has kept very the solid position, which is there is another, there is a opportunity all the time to North Korea. So whenever, if North Korea show meaningful steps for denuclearization and for, the regime or social change, even though it is not a dramatic process, South Korea, we are ready to economically support and in support in any sense to North Korea. And so unification is a very specific benefit both to North and South Korea, and that is eventually very critical precondition, not only on the Korean Peninsula, but also Northeast Asian peace as well. Okay.
President Park's past trips overseas, she's focused on sales diplomacy. This one is more focused on unification diplomacy. We've seen a shift here. Why do you think that is? What is the president trying to achieve here?
Not only domestically, but also President Park Geun-hye, she's quite popular in international community, and she is one of the leading global leaders these days. So the target countries, the target agenda, I think she is quite, aggressive since this time she is visiting Germany, and she visited to a nuclear security summit. So considering the uniqueness, the nature of the issues and country, she is focusing on the unification area, and she tried to visualize very specifically, not only to South Korean people or North Korean people, but also to the global community, what kind of specific benefit, what kind of specific, positive outcomes that we may expect because of the unification. So a couple of months ago, she delivered very interesting and attractive message. And this time, I expect she more specifically visualize and make some specific substance, what kind of vision we clearly see because of unification, having German lessons. And also next time, if the target country or agenda, if they are different, maybe she has another focus on, sales, diplomacy, or etc. So it is very, useful to our national interest.
Professor Park, we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much for being on the program and providing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, as always, for watching. We'll see you next time, After 10.
We will continue to do our best to improve our show based on the perspective of our viewers. Always feel free to leave us any comments, great ideas, or suggestions you wish to share with us.